Hey, what's up guys? Pat here, and today we're going to be doing the first of several videos focusing on draft. This one is going to specifically be for World Martial Arts Tournament's red cards. Draft Box 3 is a couple of weeks away now, and as you guys already know, locals usually try to push the draft format for the first couple of weeks to month after the draft box is released. For those of you guys who don't know how to play the format and are looking for a primer, I made one a long time ago, almost about a year ago. I'll link it down in the description so you guys can go back and watch that. But considering Draft Box 3 will have this, draft format be thrust upon us, and also since constructed is kind of a drag right now, draft is kind of like going to be the preferred way to play, I feel like, for locals for the next couple of weeks. So this is largely to help you guys out and tell you guys what I think are the best cards in the set so that you guys can succeed and win your locals in draft format. And who knows, maybe Bandai, at least at Nationals, they might do something like half the format's draft and half the format's constructed. A lot of games have done that in the past, and I know Bandai with Naruto has had split tournaments where it's half of some specific kind of format and then just half regular constructed. So that's the main reason why I'm going to start doing these videos. The blue ones will follow this one in a couple of days, and we'll eventually table back to Colossal Warfare, since those are the two sets you'll find in the draft box. But let's get into the grading scale so you guys can understand where I rank cards on a scale of 0 to 10, 10 obviously being the best, the unstoppable card. An example would be Kami's Power Piccolo. 9 is a bomb card that's still beatable. This would be like a piercing SS2 Gohan or a Fu Shrouded in Mystery. 8 would be a good SR or rare, or a top tier uncommon or common, something like Shigesh or Saiyankaba that just is absolutely nuts and can win the game by itself almost at the common level, like something that's just absolutely snap that you would be seeing a lot in constructed play. 7 is a middle SR or rare, or a good uncommon or common. It's almost always useful to have this. These are going to be the playables that you're going to be shooting for every single time you draft to have a successful deck. 6s are low SRs or rares, mid uncommons or commons. They're playables that you most likely will use, but they're not your first choice. 5s are solid cards that may get cut, but will most likely still stay in. 4 are filler cards that you are almost definitely going to cut out of your deck, and you're not going to include them into your 40 card draft deck. 3s are filler cards you'll only use if you are desperate and absolutely cannot get a consistent playable deck. 2 are filler cards that you're only going to use again if you are desperate and there's some kind of ridiculous scenario that has arisen that you have to play the card. And then 1 is something that's absolutely awful or just strictly sideboard in the most niche of scenarios. And 0 is completely unplayable in any scenario. You should never play it ever, 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 ever. So with that out of the way, let's go on to the first card in red, which is Bundle of Confidence Hercule. The front side is a 5K, and the back side is a 10K, which is, that's not really helpful. That's not what I'm looking for in a leader. But considering sometimes you're forced to take this as a leader in your first pack, if you're just playing only World Martial Arts Tournament format, sometimes you might just be stuck with it and have to draft slightly around it if you just don't open other leaders, or you just can't afford to waste picks on it. It's not the worst leader because it does let you cycle through your deck. Note that it's each battle you get to combo and draw a card, not once per turn. So basically, if your opponent attacks you with 3-4 guys, you can basically block all of their attacks as if he was like a 15 or a 20 anyway, and just cycle through your deck. So that's really strong, and I think Hercule's a lot better than people would give him credit. That said, 40 card decks, really, really easy to go through them entirely and deck yourself out. So I'm a little bit reserved on Hercule, and for that I'm going to give him a 5. He's a card that's playable. He's not the worst leader you could take, but at the same time there are serious drawbacks to him, and you got to be really conscious of that. So next up is Supreme Showdown Son Goku. This is a super rare, so odds of you actually opening this are incredibly low. And then on top of that, he suffers from a problem that is going to be for a lot of these World Martial Arts Tournament cards, and that is that he requires a specific secondary card, which is also at the super rare level. So for the most part, this card is blank. 99% of the time you draft this card, he's just going to be a 25k triple striker with no real effects. That said, 25k triple striker is still really good because for the most part in draft, 25k double strike with no actual effect is still a playable card that you'd be happy to have in your deck. You wouldn't be like overjoyed. It's not the greatest thing ever, but you know, these are the cards that you need at the top end of your curve to finish off somebody. So you could do a lot worse than a triple striker for 5 with no other effects. So for that reason, I'm going to give Goku a 7. He is definitely playable if you open him. He is a priority compared to most of the other commons and uncommons in the set. And like I said, he can close out the game, so you'd be really happy to see him. Next up, we have Heroic Duo Son Gohan. 2-drop 10Ks are, you know, not exactly the greatest. They have to do something really good, like fetch me like a Tapion in the case of Colossal Warfare's Trunks, Heroic Trunks that searches out the Tapion. I have to get some inherent value out of it, because for the most part on 2, I want to be playing 15k vanillas, or I want to be playing something like a Yajirobe where it's a blocker with upside, or, you know, something of that nature. If there's no real upside that helps me fix my draw or kill something, I want to be playing a 15k on 2 most of the time. And Gohan doesn't really end up doing that for me. For the most part, he basically just kills a blocker. This card's just a 2-drop that kills a blocker, and while that's not the worst thing, it doesn't really help me generate a lot of advantage in the late game. This card's just a terrible top deck. You know, you could do a lot better on 2 to fill out your curve than play Gohan, and for that, I'm just gonna, you know, give him a 4. Next up is Tiny Rivals Son Goten. 3-drop barrier with 15k is playable for sure. But again, we would like to have 15ks on 2 if we can, unless there's some kind of upside. Luckily for Goten, he combos really well with the other Trunks in the set. If you have the other Trunks in the set, this card is absolutely monstrous. But since they're both at the uncommon level, which means you're only going to see maybe 1 or 2 per box, it's not exactly real. Like, it is realistic, but not exactly the best. You know, it's obviously more realistic than opening the super rare Goku and Vegeta. But again, in these short print run sets, these smaller sets that are of the same size of like Tournament Power, you're only going to see something like 1 or 2 of these uncommons in a box. So you basically really have to be sure that you're in red to be able to see the Trunks to get the flip side. So for the most part, he's going to end up being a 3-drop 15k barrier most of the time. That's why I'm going to give him a 6. He's definitely playable for sure, but again, without Trunks, he's not, you know, nearly as impressive. So next up is Supreme Showdown Vegeta. He's basically the same exact card as Goku. Obviously, he has the nice effect of you can discard a card. In that case, your opponent can't activate blocker, but that's not as relevant, I feel like, you know, compared to Goku. It's like, he's definitely better than Goku for sure, but he's not good enough for me to want to make the jump from 7 to 8. That's why I'm basically going to give him a 7. You know, again, he is definitely better than Goku. If you're open Goku and Vegeta at the same time, which, you know, it's not possible, you would definitely want to take Goku, just because he actually at least has the utility of, if I drafted a world tournament leader, I can at least, you know, bin a card to make sure my opponent can't block. But, you know, blockers, while they are really important in limited, in the later turns of the game, it's usually negates is what ends up stopping things. So for the most part, it's usually not really relevant, unless you're drafting with set 2 for some reason. They just happen to have a bunch of revenge blockers. So yeah, Vegeta gets the 7. Next up is the super combo for World Tournament. There's not really much to say here. If you guys played in Tournament of Power, you already know how good Backbone Son Goku is. This is basically the same card. All the leaders in the set would be thrilled to open this. So that's why I'm going to give it a 7. You might be like, hey, why aren't you giving it an 8? This would be a top tier uncommon. The thing is, this is probably an 8 if you are playing exclusively with World Martial Arts Tournament for drafting. But in the draft box format, which is what I feel like most people are going to be playing, it's only a 7, because the World Martial Arts leaders, some of them are pretty good, but they're not as good as the Colossal Warfare leaders, and sometimes this will just be like, you know, not the greatest pick. It won't be super high value because you might be flexible, you might be flexing between 2 strategies, so it's, again, not exactly the best pick, but it is a really powerful card. It kind of, like I said, depending on where you're at in your draft and your strategy, this card, you know, evaluate it between a 7 and an 8 most likely. So here we go. Here's the Trunks that goes with the Goten, Tiny Rivals Trunks. 3-drop 15k critical, already playable. That's great. That's what I want on my 3-drops. I want something with a really powerful aggressive effect, especially in a color like red. If you just happen to have the Tiny Rivals Son Goten as well when you play this guy, then it's a 20k crit double strike, which is absolutely ridiculous. that alone should net this guy somewhere in the 8 to 9 range. But because, again, you're only going to see 1 to 2 Go-10s per box because of the uncommon rarity, it's not exactly super dependable and reliable that you're going to get that off all the time. So for that reason, I'm going to give him a 7. Again, he could be an 8 if you happen to have the Go-10, but again, it's not guaranteed. It's not realistic to have multiple Go-10s in your draft. So we're going to just evaluate him as if he was a 3-drop critical, which is, definitely gets the 7 in my book. You will definitely want to put this guy in your deck every single time. You want to snatch him up if you're in the red seat. So next up we have Mighty Mask Powers Combined, which is another super combo. When you combo with it, you get to take back a Go-10 and a Kid Trunks from your discard pile, and then you get the 10k power when you're at 4 or less life. So, like we said previously, Go-10 and Trunks are uncommon. You're not going to see that many of them in a box. So you're probably only going to see 1 or 2 of each go by. And then this card, being at common, is just going to end up being flooded. You're going to see a lot more of these than the Go-10s and the Trunks, that's for sure. It is a viable strategy to just draft a bunch of Mighty Masks and then pick up maybe 1 or 2 of each of the Go-10s. If you live the dream and you end up snatching 2 Go-10s and 1 Trunks, or 2 and 2, then I can for sure see Mighty Mask being a really good pick in draft. But I just don't see it happening. That's why I'm going to give him a 4. He's most likely a dead card that you're just not really going to use. I don't evaluate him highly. He's the kind of card where once you've comfortably been a couple packs in and you're like, I got my Go-10s, I've got my Trunkses, I'm going to see if I can get the Mighty Mask to wheel. So yeah, it's good, in the right circumstances, but for the most of the part, it's just going to be a 0-cost 10k combo that's just going to neg to you. And I just think that there are other better cards you could be playing than this, unless, again, you're in the right circumstances. So next up we have Secret Treaty Android 18, which the card wouldn't be that bad. You can switch this card and the Secret Treaty Hercule to rest mode on your battlefield to draw a card. That's not the worst effect in the world, especially since it draws aggro to this card and forces your opponent to attack it. Otherwise, you're just going to have a repeatable draw engine, which is really nice. But this card is at rare, which means it's very, very unlikely that you are going to actually have both the 18 and the Hercule. So this card is basically a 2-drop 10k with no effect, I could say a good 90% of the time. Because at least the Hercule is playable by itself, and Android 18 needs Hercule to function. So this is a card that it might just go around the table, and if you already have like 1 or 2 Hercules for some reason, you might be able to snatch it up. But for the most part, just a 2-drop 10k vanilla doesn't really do a lot. So that's why she's going to get the 3. So next up is the Hercule that goes with the Android 18. You can combo with this card even when it's in rest mode, which sometimes that's actually relevant. Sometimes you can swing at the end of the game with this Hercule, combo out, and then swing with your leader, and then draw a card, and then combo with the card you drew plus the Hercule, and that might get you there based on your sequencing. So that's a decent plus. And then you can choose this card and 1 World Tournament card in your battle area and switch it to rest mode to draw 1 card, which if you've got nothing better to do and your hand is not that good, you can basically switch this card to rest mode. If you somehow get 2 of this card and just use their effect on each other, that's also really good. So he's, again, a playable rare for sure, whereas 18 is not exactly the highest power card, but it is definitely a playable card in your draft deck, and that's why we're going to give him a 6. So next up is Heroic Duo Videl. This is a card that is obviously going to be a constructed all-star. It's probably going to completely change the landscape of how we play constructed going forward from World Martial Arts tournaments onwards. This card is basically just a red Master Roshi. That card was already great in Limited, and obviously you guys already know how good that card is in constructed. It has the additional effect of if you somehow happen to have the Heroic Duo Son Gohan, she becomes a 10,000 1-drop. That's okay in Limited, but again, the main reason you're playing this is because this is a negate with upside. You get to negate an attack, it's a 1-cost negate, and if you're somehow tapped out, this card is still a 0-cost 5k combo. So for that reason, Videl gets the 7. You will definitely pick her up, but the thing is, she's not as powerful as some of the other cards that you could be playing. She doesn't win you the game, she just stops you from losing the game, which is why she gets the 7. If you prioritize Videl too highly, I feel like you're going to have a bad time because you just won't have the power to close out games. So yeah, this is like a mid to early pick for sure in packs, but if you open a pack with like something else that's a better rating than Videl, you really shouldn't be taking Videl as your first pick in a pack unless it's just god awful. So next up is Supreme Kai. Speaking of cards that are going to completely change the way that Constructed is playable, this card is basically just Furthering Destruction Champa. It also has the upside of being a 2-drop 15k beater if you need it, which is by itself already very, very, very good. 2-drop 15k vanilla is something we would already play in our deck most of the time. We'd be happy to have it. It's not our favorite thing, but again, we would be happy to have it in our draft deck. But the fact that this is basically just Furthering Destruction Champa with upside just makes it amazing. This card can win you the game out of nowhere, and it's just always useful in every single deck. And you're just, if it's there, unless there's something absolutely broken in the pack, you're just going to take it. That's why it gets an 8. It's not, Windmill Slam, I win, like a 10 or a 9 would be, but this is a very, very strong 8. And one of the best cards I think you can draft in this entire set at the common and uncommon level, if not the best card you can draft at the common and uncommon level. So next up we have Bobbity. Bobbity is a 3-drop 5k, which is abysmal. Almost warrants not playing just based on that alone. There's not really much to say about a 3-drop 5k. It's just awful. Has Barrier, which I guess is okay. When you play it, if your leader card's red, you choose one of your red battle cards with 15k or more power and switch it to Actima. So yeah, it lets you get an extra attack in with your heavy hitters, but I don't really feel like paying 3 energy for that when I could just be dropping another heavy hitter for the cost or another mid-sized body and just keeping the pressure on. Getting 2 attacks off of one big guy might be okay sometimes in the case of, say, you open the Goku, the super rare Goku or the super rare Vegeta, but for the most part that's not really super helpful. And I know that having him gives Deborah barrier, but the thing is, if your opponent has removal that's strong, they'll probably use it on something else somewhere along the line. It's not like giving the Deborah barrier isn't exactly the greatest thing. You're basically just spending 3 energy here to untap a guy and then have them attack again, when you could just realistically be spending your 3 energy for something like Trunks and getting another 15 crit in the face, or something like a sneak attack Vegeta in Colossal Warfare, or Digging Deep Vegeta. There's a lot of other cards in the 3-drop slot that just are very impactful and do a lot more for you in the long run than Bobbity does. And that's why I'm going to give him a 2. If you're really desperate, this card could be like your 39th or 40th playable card, but I really just don't see this card getting a lot of mileage. Next up we have Deborah, aka Foreseeing Hit at the common rarity. It's obviously not as good as Foreseeing Hit because you don't get to choose the cards, which is one of the big things about Foreseeing Hit, but this is still a 4-drop 20k, which is good, right where we want to be for stats for a 4-drop. Sucks that it doesn't have double strike, but randomly ripping 2 cards out of your opponent's hand can completely ruin their entire game plan. It might not win you the game all the time, but Deborah on 4 is very powerful, and then having a second Deborah follow up on 5 can actually end the game. There's again still a lot better rares and super rares than Deborah, but poor man's Foreseeing Hit is still some degree of Foreseeing Hit, and that makes him incredibly powerful, and that's why he gets an 8. Just like Supreme Kai, you're gonna play this card. You're just gonna, if it's there and you're in the red seat and somebody didn't take this card, you should probably be taking this card. This card's better than most of the rares in World Tournament for sure. It is definitely a top tier or a god tier common in my book. I can't really think of many commons over the course of this game's history that are as strong as Deborah is, especially in a format where consistency is very low. Throwing a random discard 2 at your opponent at a critical moment can just win the game outright. So next up we have Tainted Power, Spopovich, and Yamu. The effect on this card of putting 5 cards on the top of your deck under the chosen card is awful. You almost always want to choose 0 cards from the top of your deck when you play this card, because running out of cards in your deck in draft is a very real thing the 10 extra cards that you're losing from playing in draft format is very relevant. And by, you know, taking 5 cards off the top of your deck, you might put yourself in a situation where you're just going to deck yourself. So you're never going to want to use that. Even if you have Yakon and you have multiple Yakons, it's almost not worth the 1 turn burst unless it wins you the game to use the ability. You have to win right then and there off of it. That said, it is still a 3-drop 15k, which is not the worst thing. It's barely playable, but this card could slot in as somewhere in like your 35th to 40th playable card, where you're like, okay, I need 1 more 3-drop to round out my curve and make it work. And for that, you know, Spovovich and Yamu is quite fine, which is why it gets a 4. You'll most likely cut it, but again, it can make up a playable card. So next up we have Pui Pui, which is just a 2-drop 15k critical, which is amazing. That's pretty much exactly what we want in a vanilla beater. We just want to onto jam down Pui Pui and just get in there with critical, and then if we're lucky enough to have, say, a 3-drop Pui Pui, and then they can't kill it, or you know, then we're just in great shape there. That's amazing. Critical wins games. Obviously in constructed, it really wins games in draft because your opponents don't have consistent removal and they don't have consistent ways to draw, like, you know, hit their curve. Their down dropping is a real thing that happens quite often in draft, as well as, you know, turns where players might not be able to play anything at all. So they're banking on you hitting their life to give them the cards that they need to kind of stabilize their strategy and stabilize their deck and make consistent plays. So if you're hitting them with a critical early and then following up with Pui Pui on 3, so you just hit them with 2 commons, which isn't unrealistic to get multiple of these if you're in heavy red. It's not unrealistic to have a couple of these guys in your deck. You know, just curving out a couple of Pui Puis and just smacking them in the face with the critical, you're going to win the game for sure. That's why he gets an 8. I can't really think of a 2-drop that does this much in most of the recent sets. Yajirobe in set 2 is the only thing I can think of that screams to me, this is a ridiculous 2-drop. So yeah, take Pui Pui early and often. If your rare or isn't that good, or you open a super rare that isn't like a game-winning card and you want to be in red, or you're already in red, you take Pui Pui for sure. Deborah is probably the only common I can see taking over Pui Pui in the red slot. So next up we have Yakon. Yakon gets pretty big. 2-drop 10k is not something I'm super enthusiastic about, but you can drop Yakon and have your opponents attack 1 or 2 times on their turn, and Yakon gets to be a respectable body for his 2 energy investment. However, like Spovovich and Yamu, you know, you run this risk when you play this card that you might end up milling yourself if it sticks around too long or you play too many copies of them. Yakon is like the definition of a pretty good one-of that you can get solid investment out of for his cost. So I would definitely be okay with playing 1 Yakon. He's a pretty medium pick. I feel like nothing amazing. He's very powerful, but there's sometimes where he's just completely useless as a top deck late game. So that's why I'm going to give him a 5. Again, I feel like he's worth playing in your draft deck, but he's not as good as Deborah or Goten or Trunks or Pui Pui or Supreme Kai. Like, those are going to be the main commons and uncommons you're going to be focusing for a lot in this set if you want to be playing red or if you're already in the red slot. So next up is Bobbity Spaceship. It's going to be the last card we're going to discuss today. Field cards generally, not so much field cards, but I should say extra cards in general, have to do quite a bit for me to want to play them in draft. Consistency, you know, isn't all there. So cards that are already inconsistent, I need them to supply me with some kind of utility or especially combo power for me to want to play it. Extra cards that commonly see play are cards that make me not lose the game, such as negates, or their removal, such as like Mafuba or Assassination Plot or Father-Son Gallic-Gun. Those are cards that can help me swing a game around and you know, keep tempo with my opponent. Those are the kinds of things I'm looking for when I want to be playing an extra card. And you know, you could do a lot worse than Bobbity Spaceship. If you've drafted quite a number of Pui Puis and Deborahs, I can definitely see Bobbity Spaceship coming in as a one-of in your draft deck and allowing you to dig for those cards. You can Bobbity Spaceship on 1, Pui Pui on 2, and start looking for the Deborah for 4 or a second Pui Pui to start aggressing on your opponent even harder. So, really good fixing, but you really have to have a critical mass of Deborahs, Pui Puis, and Yakons. If you have 2 Deborahs, 2 Pui Puis, and 1 Yakon, I can see you playing Babidi's Spaceship. It would be pretty good in that scenario. But for the most part, you could do worse than it, but it's still an extra card at the end of the day that doesn't remove something my opponent has in play, and it doesn't protect me from losing, which is why I'm going to give it a 4. So there you go, guys. That's the red cards for World Martial Arts Tournament. Next time we're going to be discussing the blue cards. So let me know how I did with this video, guys. It's kind of an experiment. I'll take your criticisms to heart and kind of work them into the next video. But hopefully this insight helps you guys get better at draft and understand what cards you should be focusing on. Alright, guys. I'll see you guys in the next video.